Roundtable. Welcome everybody to the Journalism's Roundtable. Glad to see you, those who are on the Zoom, as well as those who are on Facebook. My name is Richard Prince, and I write a column called Journal-isms, journal-isms.com. And that's about diversity issues in the news business. And this roundtable is sort of is related to that. It's part of the whole, part of the same thing. And the roundtable started in 1999. And when a bunch of friends got together to wish one of our number well, as she was departing to get a doctorate. And we wished her well, and she said, we'll keep this going while I'm gone. And we have, so we've been meeting every month, I think almost without fail, since 1999. We met in a DC restaurant, various locations, but then when the pandemic came along, we moved to Zoom, and we've been there ever since. It has radically increased our numbers, and also the reach that we have. We've had people joining the Zoom from China and France and South Africa and other places. So that's a good thing. We do intend to go back to meeting in person, but when we do, it will be a hybrid so that people can still participate by Zoom as well as in person. And we'll be doing that with our partners at American University, with whom we developed a partnership last year. So that's that. Okay. We are going to, we consider this a place to network and to learn, and the networking in this format takes place largely in the chat room. So feel free to use the chat room to reach people individually or send a message to the whole group. And at the end of the session, we will send out a printout of all the comments in the chat. People usually like to put links in there to things that have been discussed and that kind of thing. So without further ado, I want to move on. I'm sure I've got something. Oh, I did forget something, and that is, if anybody's here from IRE, I want people to know that I'm wearing a sweatshirt that promotes the DBEI symposium of IRE, because it has nice colors on it, and I believe in the colors. So anyway, that's that. And hooray for our IRE. I remember the dean, since he's here, once told me that once he used to go to IRE meetings, and you can count on one hand the number of people of color who were there. Well, thankfully, all that's changed, and I'm sure there are some people here who can attest to that. So that's a good thing. All right, let's raise a toast. We wanted to start off by raising a toast to our new incoming editor of Newsday, who I first encountered when he was keeping track of the number of editors of color, particularly Black editors, at newspapers for the National Association of Black Journalists. And thankfully that number has grown, and he doesn't have to do that anymore. He passed it on to somebody else. So that's good. People might know Don from some of the various places he's worked. Before he was at Newsday, he was at the Orlando Sentinel and worked for Gannett in various places such as Tennessee, Michigan, Mississippi, and Decatur, Alabama. But now he's up north in my old stomping grounds, because I grew up in Long Island. And we're glad to have him with us. We have some friends of his who are also on this call. So let's raise a toast to Don Hudson and wish him well. Don? All right, very good.
Thank you, Richard.
Yes. Now, of course, Don, we can't let you get away that easily. What's going to change now that you are going to be the editor of Newsday?
Well, I mean, first of all, thanks for having me on today. It's an honor. It's a privilege. I'm just, I'm humble to be in this position, and I'm grateful for all of the folks that I've had around me over the years who have encouraged me and kept me in the right frame of mind to stay in this field and to continue to make a difference. And more than anything, I mean, we're going to continue the tradition here at Newsday, all of the quality journalism. We're going to move it ahead, move it forward. We have a really good team in place. I love the folks that we do have. We're going to continue to build, and just we're going to do it on an everyday basis. We're going to come to work with a smile on our face and just ready to go get after it. You know, Monty Young can tell you that things have already changed and things will continue to change. I mean, the biggest difference is just making an impact in your community and making an impact on a regional level and thinking big. I try to tell folks is that we should be thinking like everyone else. We should be thinking like the New York Times, Washington Post, the LA Times. And that's the way we should be thinking on a daily basis because that's the way Newsday can be, will be, and should be.
You're here. Okay, does anyone have a question for Don or a comment to make?
Can I just say congratulations, Don?
Thank you, Dean.
I love talking to you, and it's just really much deserved. So congratulations, man.
Thank you.
All right.
Hey, Don, this is Wanda Lloyd. I just want to say how proud I am. I think on the day that it was announced, I sent you a note that it was about time because you've been in the you've been in the vineyard for a long time. Don and I were very close when I was in Alabama. He was in Mississippi. Then he came to Alabama. So I'm really looking forward to what you're going to do there.
Thank you, Wanda. I appreciate all the support over the years as well, no doubt.
And I was one of the early receivers of the survey, and the numbers weren't looking so good. And we talked about that quite a bit. And happy to see that you stuck with it, but in this, at the same time that your career has continued to move along and that you're at Newsday and now in that top gig. So congratulations.
Thank you, Will, and enjoyed the Maynard Institute and everything that you did and helping me come along as well too. So thank you.
And Don, adding my 2 cents, because I think I've known you since Orlando days and you've been charting this path from that time on, and I'm delighted to see that you are at one of the newspapers I used to work for.
Thank you, Sheila. It's great to see you again.
All right.
So I guess I'm gonna add my 2 cents here since he's my boss now. I see some former editors here, Lonnie Isabel, Leon Carter at Newsday, and these guys help pave a way that has helped to make Newsday what it is today. But what Don is not telling you is that he's one of the most humble guys I know. He makes work coming, it makes it easy to come to work, want to come to work. He's extremely supportive of the staff, and he's got big ideas. And because we have representatives from the New York Times and the Washington Post, the LA Times, we're not going to share those big ideas because we don't want to, be public with. But in all seriousness, I've been at Newsday a long time, and I am extremely happy for Don. And if I have to hang in there a few more years before I retire, I will do so if it helps him in any way possible that I can. So I'm extremely happy. I know he's embarrassed by it, but I tell him every day how grateful I am that he's in the job. So thank you, and God be with you.
Thank you, Lonnie.
Okay. I have to tell you that Peter Eisner, who was foreign editor at Newsday, wished he could be here, but he's out in California traveling to a farewell to someone else. But he wishes you the best as well. Okay, anybody else? Otherwise, we're going to move on and keep to our schedule. Great. All right. Well, we want to go now to the New York Times and particularly Dean, to find out what he's going to be up to in his new role with the fellowships he's offering. But I have another question, and between the time that we invited you and today, I saw an interesting interview with Reggie Hudlin, who directed the movie about Sidney Poitier, and he told a little anecdote of Oprah Winfrey, who of course directed that or produced that movie, and she was in awe of Sydney, and she saw him at a party, and she just, she couldn't believe herself. And she said that at the time, she was under attack from the Black community, many in the Black community, for not being, quote, Black enough. And Sydney's response was, it's always a challenge when you're carrying other people's dreams. And that's what you're doing, carrying other people, carrying our dreams. So no, I was wondering what your reaction is to hearing that, Dean.
Boy, that's my reaction is he's a lot more eloquent than I am. And a better actor. Look, these, I've thought a lot about what it meant to be the first Black editor, not only of the New York Times, but the LA Times a long time ago. And there's no question, of course, the fact that you're, for all of everybody on this call who's a journalist, who you are affects how you edit. It just does. And it should. I've also have felt really proud of the fact that in each case, I was the first Black editor of those news organizations, truly. There is, I looked sometime, I had a great lunch once with a young Black reporter at the New York Times who I disagreed with about something. And she taught me a lesson. It's always good for somebody younger than you are to teach you a lesson. So I was trying to explain to her why I thought she was wrong. And she looked at me and she said, did you think that when you hired me and people like me, we would be exactly like you? And I thought, well, that's a great lesson. In fact, no, she shouldn't be exactly like me. I should understand that she comes to the game with sort of a different generation, a different outlook. I should listen to her and understand the points where I'm wrong. I should hold on to the ones when I'm right, but I can't be right all the time. But I guess to go back to the original question, there's a lot of pressure. Don knows this too, and all of you who run news organizations know this. There's a lot of pressure, period. And of course, there's always more pressure if you're a leader who happens to be Black. There's a whole lot more pressure. But I guess I would say that after a long run, if you add LA and New York together, it's like more than a decade. The tremendous pride and the influence you can have on these institutions outweighs any of the pressure.
All right, very good, thank you. All right, now tell us what does your new job entail?
Yeah.
What should we know about that?
So I was about to leave the Times. When you hit 65, the tradition is the executive editor steps down. I'd been editor for 8 years, which shockingly is like the second or third longest run in the paper's history. When the publisher came to me and said, look, we don't really want you to leave, and we have this idea. You care deeply about investigative reporting. You also care deeply about diversity. Can we come up with something that marries those two? And so essentially what we're going to do is we're going to pick a group of fellows every year to do investigative projects. Probably in the first year, it'll be say 10, but I hope it grows over time. And people will pitch investigative stories to us. We will pay their salaries. We will edit their stories. We'll publish them in the New York Times and wherever local news organizations they're from. Freelancers can apply. People who are not connected to a news organization can apply. And what I've been doing I took a month off. So what I've been doing in the month since is visiting some newsrooms, talking to people just to sort of get a sense of what people want from this kind of program. I met with, I spent 2 days in the Baltimore Banner's newsroom. I've talked to every news organization in Jackson. I talked to NABJ a couple of days ago just to learn, because frankly, I've been out of the local news game for a long time. And it's been great, but that's essentially what it is. And the goal is to accomplish two things: is to do the work, because a lot of news organizations don't have, everybody I've talked to, and I've probably talked to 30 news organizations, nobody has the the muscle they had 20 years ago to do long, risky investigative stories, to help teach other people to do it, and to diversify the ranks of investigative reporters.
All right, very good. Is Carolyn and or Mark, are they with us yet?
I think we're both here, Richard.
Excellent. Okay. Well, since you're both here, I'd like to, if you could just take a minute to tell folks what it is you do. Since you're both managing editors, what does each of you do? I mean, how do you split this up?
Well, but first of all, thanks for having us on, Richard, and hi to everyone. I see a lot of friends on here. Mark and I were both appointed managing editors by Joe Kahn, who's the executive editor. So we can go into the details of that. But just before we do, I want to say one thing about Dean. I think I would speak for Mark in saying that there's no way that Mark and I would have these jobs if it weren't for Dean. And he cares about investigative journalism. He cares about diversity, but he also really cares about building the next generation of leaders. And at the New York Times, that has meant a lot of hands-on mentoring, guiding, advising, talking through stories, talking through careers with us. And I just couldn't let the moment go by without saluting him. I know a lot of you know him personally, but I feel like Mark and I have personally really benefited from that leadership in a personal way, and just wanted to salute Dean.
Thank you, Carolyn.
That's absolutely true. Dean was essentially giving a master's course in journalism leadership over these last 9 years, and his door was always open. And I don't know how he did it, but whenever you came by, he acted as though there was nothing else pressing in the world, and sort of your problem, your question was the most important one. So you know, an impressive leader, and we all are thrilled that he did not retire, and that we are continuing to work with him.
Thank you, Mark.
Excellent, excellent. All right. So what do the two of you do to justify your salaries?
So let me take a first attempt, and then Carolyn come in behind. And so one thing, we both are responsible for the overall journalistic excellence of the New York Times. That's a joint job, and the New York Times is no longer a newspaper. It really is this juggernaut of a news organization that has a daily podcast that is 24 hours, that is producing this digital report. We're in video, we're in live events. It really is this sprawling news organization. And both of us are just looking for ways to make sure that the bar is really high on our journalism, and that excellence is what we do every day. One of the mottos of the Times is journalism worth paying for, and we're all in on a digital subscription model. That's sort of our future, that people will pay for the digital subscription to the Times, and we have very ambitious goals to expand that. So we need to deliver journalism that people can't find anywhere else, that it's sort of worth the cost of your subscription to come to us. And so journalistically, there's a lot to each of our jobs, and there are areas that Carolyn focuses on and areas that I focus on. But in general, it's just kind of keeping this news organization that Dean has, is leaving us with, firing on all cylinders, and continuing to do the sort of work that he was so known for.
Yeah, I would just add to that, Richard. When I came to the Times, which was '07, I think there were about 1,200 employees in the newsroom, and now we're coming up on 2,000. So the complexities of running the place and the many kinds of formats from audio to TV to traditional text and visual investigations has just expanded dramatically. So some of that is just the sheer running of the place. And as Marc said, like making sure everything is up to standards of excellence. But one of the missions I'm also very involved in, and I actually worked with Dean a little bit on, is the mission of independence, which is independent journalism, not becoming captive to any particular interest group or pressure group, or sort of infusing the next generation of journalists, reporters, et cetera, with the values that a lot of us picked up just by being around traditional newsrooms and being around editors who had the time to teach us what it meant to be a reporter and what it meant to stand up to power. So that has been a critical focus of mine. And lastly, I'm hoping that Marc and I and our executive editor, Joe Kahn, can do a little bit of what Dean did for us, which is there's a new tier of journalists who are now emerging to take over, like our Metro desk and our culture desk. And Marc and I really want to spend a lot of time mentoring them, developing them, and feeling, as Dean did, that the Times is in good hands when that next generation ascends. So we have our hands full, but we're also very excited and I think a really good team.
Hey,
Excellent.
Richard, can I add one thing
please.
to what they said? Because I mean, many of us grew up in newsrooms where you wonder why you need two managing editors and the whole structure. You almost can't, it's almost hard to describe how different and much bigger the New York Times newsroom is than it was 10 years ago. I mean, the first speech I gave to the newsroom when I became editor, I guess 9 years ago, I told everybody that to get ready for a hard ride because we were probably going to have to get smaller. And we had a couple really rough years, but I never thought it was hard for me to imagine we would get this much bigger, but it's huge. I mean, the podcasting operation alone is the size of some small newsrooms. The video operation is like the size of some small newsrooms. So it's just a huge, complicated operation. It just looks very different.
And I'm sure that you couldn't have done that without the backing of the board and the publisher.
No, that's right. That's right.
Because we have other examples that they just announced, Alden Capital just announced that they want to scrap the endorsement editorials from Chicago Tribune and Daily News and their other properties. So publishers do make a difference.
Yep.
Now I want to go back to Don for a minute because Wayne Dawkins had a question. Wayne, what was your question for Don? Oh, we can't hear you. Unmute, please. Not yet.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Okay, so my question was, once I started hearing about aspiring to compete with the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, etc., you know, I thought about how local papers or regional papers have been, let's face it, gutted. So my question was, yes, I live in Virginia, but I was just wondering, knowing how things used to be, what kind of newspaper is Newsday now compared to 20 years ago? Because what I remembered was in 21st century, they kind of turned more inward to just be very local, focus on Nassau and Suffolk, and of course, all those commuters going back into the city. So, I mean, what does this mean? Was it going to kind of move away from the model they probably practiced in the last 20 years? Because now our big papers, the Times and the Post, etc., they beefed up, they've added muscle, they have the bodies, but the papers have become more nationalized. We count on maybe 5 to give us our news, but the local ones are still losing muscle. because they can't do I heard smaller papers can't do the investigative work that the big ones can do, or even decent local reporting. They have good days every now and then, but most of the time they're just doing the best they can with a skeletonized workforce. So just wondering.
Wayne, I'm going to get you a subscription to us. So, I mean, I really believe, I mean, we're a regional, local paper. We have a state bureau, we have a DC bureau, and we have close to 250 journalists here. Plus, I have about 20 openings. So if you have some good folks, send them my way as well, too.
Oh, I will. I'm a department chair. I'll get some bodies to you.
Okay, great. But we have a really good investigations team also too that we're building actually right now too. So we want to do investigative work just like we've been doing in the past, except better. I want to be able to compete with the LA Times and the New York Times, the Washington Post, et cetera. I read them every day, and we should be just as good as they are. So that's what I'm going to be preaching on a daily basis, is that we should be just as good or better.
Well, that's encouraging because Sheila Solomon, who had a hand in hiring me at my last daily, the Daily Press in Hampton Roads, Virginia, to show how bad it's gotten. When I was there, we had 135 full-time newsroom employees for 100,000 circulation paper. Now the number is 10 people. 10 people are putting out that that paper. So it's insane. But what you just said, you've added muscle. So you want to, you have high aspirations. So thanks for telling us that.
I'm filling jobs every day. I've been working on it today.
All right.
I've got another question here, and that is about transparency and gaining the trust of people. What do you do when you go and do all this reporting and a large percentage of the population refuses to believe it?
Wow.
And they become election deniers, and they campaign for secretaries of state to overturn elections and all of that. I heard an interview with Jelani Cobb, who's now the new dean of Columbia Journalism School. And he said that that's going to be one of his biggest challenges, is dealing with students and journalism to be, who have to deal with this whole issue of misinformation, that the environment they're in. And one of the suggestions that he made was that newspapers be much more transparent about how they get their information, perhaps including links, for example, on the in the web stories to their source material, or at least an explanation as to how they know what they know. So I'd like to know, what do you do in that situation when people just don't want to believe you?
He's right. First off, Jelani's right. It's going to be the most important, other than the economic challenges that a couple people have alluded to. That's going to be the most important challenge. I think we have a bad track record in the press for being transparent. We don't in the days when we were just all print, we didn't tell people how we made decisions. We didn't tell people, who our reporters were, what their backgrounds were. We didn't own up to our mistakes. We just didn't talk about this stuff. Frankly, we were a little arrogant. I think we weren't very diverse. I think in the last few years, we understand that that's wrong. And now we have to tell people how we decide to give somebody anonymity, how we make decisions. By the way, that's rubbing up against the difficulty of digital printing, which demands speed. It's not, digital printing demands speed. Your mistakes are evident. You have to do headlines in seconds, not the way you did in the print era. But he's right. We have to really be transparent. We have to tell people how we do business. There's still going to be a chunk of Americans who won't believe us. I think that we have to go into those communities, frankly, and look them in the face and say, here's how we do what we do. I think the decline of local news is part of this equation. In the last month, I've been talking to editors, particularly editors in the South, in Alabama and Mississippi, for instance. And, the fact that there's so few journalists in some of those states now means that, you know, there was an era when there was a chance you actually lived near a journalist. If, you know, the Jackson Clarion Ledger, you know, which does great work, I think has about 15 journalists in its newsroom. So what are the odds when you shrink those numbers? What are the odds you're actually going to meet a journalist, see a journalist, have a journalist attend, you know, some event where you are? In the era of 200, 300 person, 400 person newsrooms, people used to actually print, you know, transcripts of church sermons. I think we have a lot of work to do, a lot harder because we're smaller. But I think, but Jelani's right. We have to be much more transparent than we were, and much more honest and level with people.
Very good. Carolyn, have your hand
Yeah,
up.
just very quickly, we found out, you think of New York Times readers as pretty sophisticated. We found out they just had no idea about some basic things from, you know, the differences between a column and an article, or how we get our information. So we created, our publisher created something called the Trust Team. And basically what they're trying to do, mainly on the website, is explain how we do our journalism. It's almost like a media literacy course in real time, how we got this information, when we can, including the information, including the data, the number of people we talk to. But you would be amazed at what people both don't know and kind of assume wrongly about journalism and how they do their work. And I just want to add one footnote to what Don was saying earlier about Newsday. As a former Metro editor at the Times, Newsday consistently punches above its weight and continues to. I think of the aggressive political reporting, but also it was a project they did a couple of years ago on housing discrimination on Long Island, which was very ambitious and very revealing. And so, Don, we'd be happy to talk personnel, you know, if there are people we can send your way. I know we've hired some people lately from Newsday, and we'll continue to, but
and please do. We have some good ones over here, and you stole a couple from me. I'd love to have them back, but that's okay. I told them they can stay a little while.
They did really well during COVID, and that was one area where we picked up a good editor. But anyway, I just read it closely and consistently impressed by what you're doing.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And we're doing a great series on policing on Long Island right now, also, that we've been doing all year. That's really making an impact, and it's ongoing.
Matter of fact, I remember we had the Pulitzer winners in a few months ago, and they said that that it was Dean's idea to do that piece or series, I guess, on Black people who were stopped by police and fatal police death. Can you talk a little bit more about that, Dean?
Yeah, there was so much good reporting in newspapers. And forgive me for referring mainly to newspapers. I'm among the older people on this call. About police abuse in the aftermath of George Floyd. And so I pulled the investigative team together, and we were trying to figure out what can we do that hadn't been done. Everything had been done, but where can we put our muscle in to tell people something that was a little bit different? And that's where we ended up with police traffic stops. There have been reporting on police traffic stops. I don't mean the whole subject was new, but Newsday, the Post, and others had done. I don't like to purely duplicate other work. You always want, you know, one of my mottos as an editor was always like, what can we do that nobody else is doing? What can we do that hasn't been done? And I woke up every morning and walked into the newsroom with that question every day. Half the time, the answer was I couldn't come up with anything. But half the time, you do come up with something, right? And if that's your aspiration, you're going to end up coming up with stuff. And that was the origins of that.
Very good. And Carolyn, back to you on this transparency and all that. Is there any chance of that public editor returning?
I was hoping Dean could take that question.
First off, I'll say one thing about the public editor. The public editor never worked for the executive editor. I mean, people always thought that I got rid of the whole idea of the public editor was that the public editor worked for the publisher. I had no influence over the subjects. I hated half the subjects, obviously. You know, so in a way, it's the publisher's decision. Though I will say that frankly, the original reason to have a public editor doesn't quite hold anymore. People have sort of turned that into like a little quickie thing where they criticize us for saying the internet can be our public editor. That's actually not the point. The public editor was put in place because after the Jason Blair episode, the New York Times learned that tons of people had been trying to reach the paper to tell them Jason Blair was making stuff up, and they couldn't get through, and nobody would listen to him. That's just not the case anymore. I mean, we're aware of all the criticism of us. You know, sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree. So I think the original reason to have a public editor, and frankly, we're not the only ones who've gotten rid of our public editor. You know, people focus more on the Post because, on the New York Times because we're the New York Times, but the Post already also got rid of its public editor. I think, frankly, I think it's much, much easier to criticize and get through the leadership of a newsroom today than it was when the first public editor was set up.
Okay. Fred Sweets has a question for you.
So Dean, I guess your unit would entertain working with a small Black weekly if they pitch an interesting story
Absolutely.
in, say, St. Louis, of course. And how would that work in terms of resources?
Yeah.
Coming into town
Yeah.
and working on a piece? We do the legwork first and as part of it, or how does that work?
It should be, first off, my email address is dbaquet@nytimes.com. And I'm happy to talk to you before, because we've been talking to individual editors, including at Black publications, about what it would take. It shouldn't be it shouldn't be overly general. You can't pitch. I mean, some editors have said, can I pitch I generally think the governor's a bad guy. How about that? And my answer to that is, that's too vague. Come back to me when you have some specifics. So it should be a fairly specific target, though I don't think we're asking that you do all the reporting beforehand, but it should be a specific enough target so that we could sit down together and figure out whether it's a doable story, if that makes sense. And the way it would work.
Sure, we will have this specific area, but may not have the resources to do it all.
Fantastic. You should reach out to me. And the one thing we've learned talking to editors, by the way, is we're flexible with approach. Like, I think when we started this thing, we had this notion of how it was going to work. And some editors have said to me, look, man, I don't have time to work on a big pitch for you. Can we talk? And as a result, we still need the pitch, but we go to newsrooms and we actually spend time talking to editors and reporters to try to tease out and help them shape the pitches. But reach out to me, and in the next couple of weeks, we're going to put up our website's going to be done, and we're going to start taking pitches. But I'm happy to talk to you before that.
I can't wait. Okay, partner. Thank you.
Please, everybody mute when you're not speaking so we don't get feedback. Okay, Rebecca Aguilar has a question.
Hi, thank you so much, and thank you for all your panelists. Dean, I wanted to ask you, just following up on what Fred just asked, what about Spanish language media? There's a lot of investigations in the Latino communities. Do you see yourself also pairing up with Spanish language media to flush out these investigations? And thank you again.
Yeah, no, the answer is yes. Some of it's going to depend in the first year on what our resources are, because we're starting. Somebody asked me, for instance, about we're trying to build a team, and my hope is the answer will be yes. I don't know whether we can pull it off in the first year, frankly. I don't know whether we'll have the resources or the expertise, or frankly, we'll know how to do it well enough to do it in the first year. But I think the goal is to get bigger and more ambitious. So the answer would be yes.
Excellent. Karen Dunlap has a question.
Hey, Dean, I want to first
Hi, Karen.
congratulate you for the excellent journalism. Hey, really excellent journalism. Of course, my favorite was your interview with JC.
Karen, you're breaking up.
All the other important stories too. And thank you for your time on the Poynter Institute Advisory Board. It's good to have about, okay. You want me to
Thank
write
you,
the
Karen.
question?
No, I
I'll
can,
send it in.
but thank you for all of that, Karen. It's good to see you too.
Okay, Hazel Edney wants to ask something.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Hello, everyone. Dean, I want to ask you about, well, first, I'm Hazel Trice Edney, editor-in-chief of the Trice Edney Newswire and former editor-in-chief of the NNPA News Service. I would like to ask you about an idea that I already have. I've been working on it for years, but just have not had time to work on it thoroughly enough to publish anything on it. What if I were to publish a piece of it first on my Newswire? Would then I qualify to get help with the investigative part of it to
Yeah.
publish the rest of it, or does it have to be exclusive to you?
Boy, I haven't gotten that one. I think that if you publish a promising piece and then came to me and said, I have a lot more stuff that needs reporting, because the goal is not to just publish. The goal is to help people with the resources to do the work, right? So I think if you came to me, if you publish something really good tomorrow, and then said, I have a lot more leads and a lot more tips, the answer would be yes.
Okay, excellent. You'll hear from me. The second question, I have a question for Don. Don, I teach multicultural media history at the Howard University Kathy Hughes School of Communications, and much of that involves my teaching from a Black press perspective, the history of the Black press, Black-owned media, etc. But I also emphasize how they may never own, they may end up working for mainstream top-level media. So I guess my question to you is, I don't think they've ever seen anybody like you, at the very top in a mainstream organization. Would you be willing to take a minute of your time to drop in on Zoom and say hello to my class at some point?
Yes, I'd be more than happy to. But the ones that paved the way, Dean right there, he's the one who paved the way. I mean, as I told him here recently, I mean, I always looked up to everything that he did across the country, and folks like Benny Ivory and Glenn Proctor, they helped pave the way for a lot of us as well. But I'll be more than happy to,
Wonderful, thank you. I'll get your email from Richard.
Okay, actually, Don, I've got a request for you to put your contact information in the chat.
It is. I put my email address in there. Yes,
excellent.
It's in there.
Okay, here's another question.
Kevin, by the way, had some good thoughts. Kevin Merritt had some good thoughts about how different models for public editors. I wonder, he put it in the chat, but I wonder if he
speak up, Kevin, then.
No, I mean, I think it's important to, like Dean said, the transparency. We have the tools to be more transparent, explain what we do. I think, we have a job that I think if it hasn't been going to be reposted, it's a community engagement editor, and it really is just trying to be closer to communities. A lot of communities, LA is not alone, but we got like 100 languages spoken in LA alone. There's a lot of communities. Some don't have relationships to newspapers. That's not part of what, their way of connecting with the world. And so some of it is going to communities, doing things, being present, finding ways to be more transparent about what it is that we do, and just being and acting as a bridge, really, between those who we would like to consume our work and trying to explain to them more about us. And so, I put that in there because I know someone had mentioned that Dwayne Wickham was being public editor at the Banner. I think was really good. And I'm sure what he's going to do is bring a lot of what he's always done entrepreneurially and at Morgan State and elsewhere, and being a longtime Baltimore native resident, So I just think they're different models, but thanks, Dean, for allowing me to say something about that.
Very good.
Kevin,
very
I think your point is really great. Though I have to tell you, the sun-drenched palm tree is just mean.
Yeah, but you have some of that, you
I do, but
you
I'm
got a
not
place
there.
out
I'm not
here,
there
you-
right. I know, but I'm not there right now. That's
yeah,
why.
well, now that you have now that you're not, anchored at in New York City, you're doing your new thing. You can travel and be everywhere now, soak it up.
I'll see you soon.
Yeah.
Okay, another question from a few months back, and that is the day that the shootings in the Buffalo supermarket took place. And the Times had worked weeks and weeks and weeks on having a special cover of all the COVID deaths. And then this happens. I was watching a lot of the social media traffic in which the Times was blasted for not having the Buffalo shootings on the front page, instead sticking with its idea of having the special double truck on COVID deaths. So could you explain a little more about how that works?
Yeah, sure. We had created that special section, and for those who don't know what Richard's referring to is the wrap that included essentially
Wrap, yeah.
the name and a sentence or age about everybody who died of COVID at that point. And that in making the commitment to do that, we essentially were saying we were not going to have a traditional front page. It takes a lot mechanically in print to make that commitment. First off, it had to be close enough. I can't remember whether it was it's been so long, the 100,000th death or the 200,000th death. I can't remember. So it had to be close to the date, first off. And secondly, we had made the technological commitment to do it. And it's hard to stop that for those of you who've been editors. It's hard to turn the thing off. And so I made the decision to proceed with it. I think we gave the shooting much prominence online, which has a bigger audience, and we covered the shooting aggressively, but it was too late to undo. And also, the COVID death is also a historic story that affected the lives of a lot of Black people too, and that in terms of an American tragedy, they're both American tragedies. But I think that the COVID death was enough of an American tragedy, so I didn't feel terrible about doing it, frankly.
I hear you. Okay. All right. So we mentioned the word diversity a number of times. Can Don and Dean or Carolyn or Marc bring us up to date on the progress of diversity in your newsrooms?
For us, Carolyn or Marc, do you want to start?
Sure. Without going too deep into the weeds, we did a couple things after the murder of George Floyd. One was look company-wide at a whole range of diversity and inclusion issues. And then we did a very newsroom-specific analysis and kind of clear-eyed assessment of where we were. And essentially what we found is that the New York Times, in a lot of ways, was a place that was very hard to navigate, was still very opaque, still seemed to be, in some ways, your advancement seemed to be based on who you knew and relationships. And that was a problem for a lot of people who came to the Times, but it was especially acute for people of color. And so we set out to change a whole bunch of things. We set up a culture and careers department. We set up individual goals, diversity goals for each desk. But most meaningfully to me, we focused on Black and Latino leadership because that seemed where we were both weak and in need of kind of developing the next generation of people who could really shape coverage. So since that report, we have made progress. I think we went from about 9% to about 14% Black and Latino leaders. For leaders, we mean basically deputy and desk head and above. And there have been some significant appointments that you've probably read about. Our Metro editor is a guy named Nestor Ramos, very talented editor. Our new books editor is a guy named Gilbert Cruz. I won't go through all the individuals, but essentially we've made some progress, but there's still a huge amount of work to be done. And some of that work is in the leadership area, and some of that work is continuing to recruit. We've probably made the most progress in terms of recruitment. I think now over 50% of our hires annually are people of color. But as everybody on this call knows, like you can't relent on any of these issues, because culturally it's very easy to backslide. It's very easy to stall out. And a lot of what you have to do as a masthead, and this is what Marc and I are focused on, is really the individual development of leaders who, you see as kind of being able to shape, influence, change coverage, bring people along, and represent a really diverse future for the New York Times. So I think the masthead, Dean, you would correct me if I'm wrong, is probably the most diverse that we've had. And like I said, we have really made progress since 2020, but we want to make a lot more progress. Marc, is there anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, that's a good summary. Let me just say a couple of things that, hiring, we've done a great job, and we've set up infrastructure at the New York Times to support those who we're hiring, but retention remains a challenge. We need to, turn the New York Times into the very best place to work in the business. And there are all sorts of journalists of color who are getting offers from other news organizations all over the place. Sometimes that's a great thing for some great challenge, but we don't want someone leaving the New York Times because they couldn't find opportunity at the New York Times. I'm perfectly fine with someone leaving for some great challenge elsewhere, but I don't want anyone leaving because they felt like the New York Times was a dead end place. It shouldn't be. I think the one of the most important things that we've done, and I think this will connect with everybody on this call, we're starting to hold leaders at the Times accountable for what they're doing on DEI, and it's going to be something that are you diversifying your staff, department heads and others? Are you creating opportunities? Are you developing diverse leadership? A company report can only go so far, and I think we really have to make sure in 5 years and 10 years, when that report sort of drifts off into the past, that we've put in place an infrastructure and an ethos that makes diversity just sort of essential to what we do.
Let me ask this question though: Are you tying compensation to their progress on diversity?
Yes.
Yeah. So the bottom line, the answer is yes. I mean, so how successful you are as the editor of whatever, there's going to be a diversity component built into that, and that will directly connect to one's compensation. Carolyn and I what we do on diversity will be directly related to, you know, our compensation in the end of the year. So the answer is yes. And I think there's been a lot of talk about doing this in the past, but we're baking it into our system now.
Very
By the
good.
way, if I can add one thing, I mean, I made a little list to myself of the major news departments that are now run by people of color: the national desk, the metro desk, the books desk, the international desk, the real estate desk, the sports desk. It's a much more, I mean, I don't think anybody who works for the New York Times who's on this call would deny that we have issues. Of course we do. But it's a much more diverse and leadership team than it was even 5 years ago.
Very good. I want to ask Roger Witherspoon to just give us a little glimpse of how much the Times has changed over the years. He sent me an email about his own experience that I'd like him to share with the group.
Can I also too mention one other thing, Richard?
Oh,
When
yeah.
it comes to diversity here at Newsday, I'm really proud because of a lot of moves we just made here recently. So if you look at our page 2 of the people in positions with a seat at the table, 8 of the 15 are people of color.
Very good. Thank you.
Happy to say that, actually, and we're still growing.
Okay, Roger,
Sorry.
tell us about that.
All right, Dean, I was really happy to see when you became head of the New York Times Washington Bureau, because in '71, I became the first Black State House reporter in the East. So I had a desk in the basement of the New Jersey State House because the Legislative Correspondence Club didn't want Blacks on the main floor. And the vice president of the Correspondence Club was a guy named Neil Lewis, who came up to me and said, Blacks don't belong in political journalism because we have standards that you can't meet. And I said, you've got to count of 5 to get out of my way. And he stepped aside, and that was the end of that. So when I saw that he was going to Washington, it was, good riddance. But when I saw your promotion, I said, oh, so this guy who doesn't think Blacks belong in the business is going to spend the rest of his career answering to one. I said, thank you, Jesus.
That's a sad story, but a great story too.
All right, Karen Berry has her hand up, and so does Jay. So Karen and then Jay.
I have a really specific question about the New York Times. Karen Berry and Skate. How do you address the informal and unwritten part of your newsroom culture that could potentially block the advancement of Black journalists? I did a tryout on the copy desk of the Times in 1980, and that's been decades. And one thing a friend of mine on the staff told me was that to advance at the Times, you have to be a reporter for the Times. Now, I see that as something that could potentially just, I've seen it spoken of publicly by at least 2 people, and saying specifically that they believe it blocked their advancement at the Times, and that they thought they could have gone further had they been a reporter at the Times. So what have you done about that part of the very entrenched, from what I see, very entrenched culture that is not written down anywhere? Every time I hear about it, they say it's unwritten. So, but that's, that means that, I haven't looked at the people who have been hired, their backgrounds, but that has a potential for those who you hire from the outside, and certainly for someone who might be on the copy desk, who wants to advance to be an editor, and may feel like, well, I'm not a great reporter, but I think I could be a pretty good editor.
I think that was clearly part of the Times culture through like the 60s, 70s, 80s, and maybe even into the early 90s. I joined the Times as a reporter in 1990. It's not part of the Times culture now. I mean, there are people on the masthead who came up through the copy desk. There are department heads who came from other news organizations and have never been Times reporters. The guy who ran culture and now runs books has never been a reporter in the New York Times newsroom. Monica Drake, who's one of the senior leaders of the New York Times newsroom, came up through the copy desk. And frankly, even if, and I don't believe in that system, I think somebody who has the chops to be an editor should be to run coverage, should be able to run coverage. Even if that was still true, the era of the internet has blown that up anyway, because a huge percentage of the people that Marc and Carolyn are hiring now are not traditional reporters, right? I mean, the people who, the woman who created the Daily has never been a New York Times reporter and has, came to the New York Times to run the Daily. The people who run visual investigations, some of whom are, department head level editors, the power that graphics has brought to the, the digital graphics and digital presentation has brought to journalism. So I think that was probably true a long time ago. It's not true now. In fact, I think, and I bet you Don and Kevin would say the same thing.
Can I ask a follow on that?
Sure.
Did it happen because of the changes that were forced upon the paper because of the internet and because you had to change, or because someone took a second look at it and said, hey, this really isn't working for us?
It started before that. It started, and I'm not sure, frankly, it's before I became editor. I mean, you started to see it in the mid 1990s. You would see like the culture editor was a guy who came up through the copy desk. The Metro editor was a guy who'd come through the copy desk. I think it started, frankly, because, there were some people who were really good editors who couldn't be denied. And then I think the internet just sort of like exploded the whole thing and said, if you're waiting for somebody who's done all of the things that, who's been a reporter and done every step along the way, you're going to be waiting a long time. So it started before the internet, and the internet like sealed the deal.
Okay, Jay.
Yeah, I was just intrigued by something you said very early on, that who you are should affect how you edit. And I wonder if you could just elaborate on that a bit. I was curious what you meant.
Sure. And I am one of those people who, the word objectivity has come to be a cuss word, so I don't even use it anymore. I am one of those people who believes in independence and being open-minded. I am. But I think that, first off, here's my definition of what it means to be open-minded, right? Every journalist, I mean, it's funny, Wesley Lowery wrote an op-ed piece for us, and everybody assumed I would disagree with it, and I didn't. Anybody who's read the history of quote unquote objectivity understands that it actually understood, the people who sort of created that whole notion understood that nobody was objective. It's impossible to be objective. The fact that even apart from the fact that I'm African-American, the fact that I'm from Louisiana influenced how I looked at the Katrina story. My mother's house, went underwater during Katrina. That was a very emotional, powerful story for me. Everybody brings something to the table. The job of a news organization that wants to be independent is to provide an infrastructure to make sure that the stuff you bring to the table doesn't skew the coverage, doesn't make the coverage unfair. So everybody, the reason you want a diverse newsroom is because you want a newsroom filled with people who have seen the world from different perspectives, who've lived elsewhere, have had other experiences, have been poor, have gone to state schools, not just Ivy League schools, who've experienced different parts of the world. And my own view is from that mix of people with different backgrounds and different worldviews, if you edit it, because you do have to edit a news report, you will end up coming as close to the truth as possible. Does that answer?
Okay, Carolyn, and then Roger.
I just want to add one thing, which was a conversation that Dean and I had, which kind of brought this home to me. So after the massacre at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, which was predominantly gay people who were killed, you know, I grew up Irish Catholic, but also gay. And one thing that I was so struck by in the initial moments of that were the mothers who were looking for their kids who had gone to the Pulse nightclub, and that these kids' lives were not hidden from their parents the way previous generations had. And Dean recalled that there had been, I think, a Louisiana fire where at a gay nightclub where basically people perished, but their families were so embarrassed that they were there. It was an entirely different story. And I just remember our conversation the day after the Pulse nightclub massacre occurred, and just felt like we were bringing something different to it. And it kind of enriched how we thought about the coverage.
What did you bring different? I'm sorry, I missed that. What did you bring different to it?
I think, oh, I'm sorry. Well, I think because I'm gay, the poignancy of seeing these parents look for their kids, and the fact that they had this loving relationship with this generation of gay people in a way that wasn't the case when I was born, and wasn't the case in that earlier generation that Dean was able to point to in Louisiana. And it felt like, you know, I had sort of this outsider's view, and we were able to bring something that felt like a different perspective. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. Roger.
Thank you both for that answer. Appreciate it.
Yes, Roger.
Hi, part of the impetus for news organizations opening up and allowing Blacks to become editors was the successful discrimination suit at the New York Daily News, which was decided in '84. And that opened a lot of doors for everyone. The Daily News was a particularly physically hostile place. I became the first Black editor there, and in '77. And my first day moving from reporter to the editor's desk, two white reporters got up, walked over, and the taller one said, "I'm not taking orders from a nigger unless you can kick my ass." So I did. And that was the end of that. But it was not uncommon for Blacks to run into physical opposition back in those days.
Was that in the newsroom? Did that occur in the newsroom?
Yeah.
Okay, just checking.
Oh yeah. Dave Hardy's fight occurred outside the newsroom. Garland Thompson at the Baltimore Sun, his was in the cafeteria. I mean, it was not unusual for these things to occur. And you either stood up or you didn't.
It's important to keep that when you describe that. You know, look, I walked into my first newsroom in 1970, I guess 7.
You're a youngster.
It's important. Somebody in the chat talked about the Jackson paper. It's important to keep in mind, right, that there was the newsrooms of 25, 30 years ago were not nirvana. And yes, somebody also mentioned in the chat, objectivity was held against Black journalists, you know, for a long time. I think that's absolutely true. You couldn't cover certain subjects, which is ridiculous. It's the kind of, I mean, of course that's ridiculous. If you were that restrictive, I'm not sure how you'd cover any story, right? But if I can say one thing about in my conversations with local journalists over the last month or two, for all of the problems, and it's a crisis, right? These newsrooms are like shrunken to like 14, 15, 12, you know, cover. I mean, Newsday, by the way, tribute to Don and his publisher is a real outlier in terms of having a big, robust newsroom that's hiring. But there's also a lot of more diversity in thought and an attitude, and there's a lot more open-mindedness, and a lot of these not-for-profits, there are glimmers of real hope for the future of journalism in terms of what it looks like. There are a lot more Black editors. There are a lot of not-for-profits that are not dependent on advertisers. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on that's really interesting if you look closely.
Very good. Jim Estrin had a question. Jim, we got you unmuted.
Actually, I was thinking, Mark, of conversations we had about unconscious bias, you know, and the effect of that and of training. And I was wondering what your thoughts are these days. You know, I know there's a really large newsroom, a global newsroom approach looking at these things, but how does unconscious bias training fit in?
Thanks, Jim. You know, hearing some of these stories about the way newsrooms operated in the 70s sort of, you know, gives me chills. No one these days uses racial slurs, at least in my presence. There's sort of you know, certain activity that was common back then that now would result in you being escorted from the building. But that does not mean that we don't, in our journalistic editorial decisions, sometimes sort of screw up. And what we do a whole lot is it's sort of baked now into our into the way we operate, is after a story like Buffalo, after a story like Uvalde, we will go back and do a retro. We'll get a whole bunch of people together and sort of you know, hash out what went well, what where the room for improvement should be. And that's one area where this sort of thing comes up. It's not finger pointing, but it's just saying, if we had to do it all over, would this headline be the headline we would have written? If we had to do it all over, would we have you know, either included the race of this person or not included the race of this person? You know, it was through this sort of retro that it sort of became clear that we would refer to, we would sometimes refer to teenagers who were Black as young men or men, and white kids who were teenagers as teenage boy. You know, some that would actually creep into our copy, and that comes out by sort of just, you know, going back and paying attention to word choice. And some of these things, you know, it wasn't, you know, it's not a bigot who makes that you know, decision. It's just something that creeps into copy. But I think we have to spend some time really on the details of race coverage. I mean, I notice a whole lot. I think it's less now, but it still appears in our stories that we will identify when someone is Black in a story. And then I look, and then there's the name of someone and no race of that person. And you know, this happened when I was the national editor of the New York Times, and these are national stories. So I was able to send a note to the reporter and editor saying, I noticed you identified this one Black person by race. Could you please identify everybody in the story by race? Let me know the race of everybody. And I was doing that simply to make the point that we're not writing for white people. We're not, and we'll let you know when someone isn't white. We're writing for a diverse, multicultural, international audience. And that means that some of our conventions of old have to be rethought. So your question is a good one, a really good one, and it requires, eternal vigilance to stay on top of things creeping into stories in an unintended way.
Okay, all right, wait, Barbara Reynolds, then Karen, and then we got to sort of wrap up. You got to unmute, Barbara. Barbara, you got to unmute.
Yeah, I was in the Chicago Tribune in the 70s, and one of the first women sent to Washington, to the Washington Bureau. But when I was hired, I was told that I was a token and that I was only there because the Black Panthers had demanded that they have a person of color, and I just happened to be there. And it was, nobody ever said words like, I'm going to kick your so-and-so. They use emotional trauma on me that you'll never be good enough. Why are you here? Just over and over. But because I really related to the Black press, this is what saved my sanity, because I started 2 publications there and was always on radio and TV. But my point now is, what is the mentality around white supremacists? Because as I look out the world, white supremacy is infiltrating the politics so deeply, the economy. Do you see this understanding of how really bad and deep this mess is in where you are in your editorial positions?
Well, I want to kick that one to Kevin or Don or somebody else with that, because that's a hard one. I think there are 2 conflicting things going on right now. I'm not enough of a therapist or historian even to understand whether what we are seeing now with the open assault, racist. I don't know. Frankly, I've debated with historians whether that exists more today than it did 30 years ago. I'm not sure. It may just be that people have a way to find each other now, because it was one of the bad side effects of the wonderful, great effects of the internet. I had a long conversation with a historian actually a couple weeks ago, and we were debating the difference between this era and Strom Thurmond and George Wallace. And I'm not sure the percentages are higher, but it's very different, partly because frankly, it's infiltrated an American political party, as we've all written, in ways that it had before. But to me, that's the argument for deep reporting. I think my answer to every question I don't know the answer to, by the way, frankly, is I want to report and find out the answer. And I think that's one of the challenges for journalists today, is how do we understand the presence of the open racism that has come to exist in society now, whether it's different, whether it's more. And I don't fully know the answer, and I haven't seen anybody who actually does, but I think one of our jobs is to try to figure that out.
Very good. Karen Berry, and then John. You.
I wanted to kind of piggyback on what Marc was just saying. My experience in Anscape, I just basically just said, look, I'm just going to say this, and pointed out that we were in the habit of saying Black and brown. And I said, we should be interviewing brown people, whoever you think brown is. It usually meant Latino. But I noticed that it was becoming like a cliche in our copy to refer to Latinos, I mean, just adding them on to Black people as having this common experience, but you see nary a Latino or Hispanic person interviewed in the story. So I said, look, you know, if that's indeed true, then we should speak to someone who and it would add to the story or not. You know, if you just mean Black people, then say Black people. But why are we saying Black and brown and we're not interviewing any brown people?
Really? Okay, John, you have a question? John Yearwood.
Thanks, Richard. Good to see you again, Richard. And I just want to say hello and congrats to Don. My question, though, is for Dean about the fellowship. I'm wondering if, Dean, having, say, the Clarion Ledger or whichever publication published first, is that a deal breaker? I mean, does it have to be published in the New York Times first? And second, I'm just curious about financial remuneration. Say, for example, a young reporter with the St. Louis American, since Fred Sweets talked about, asked a question earlier, I'm wondering if there is any financial remuneration for having their investigations published in the Times.
First off, we will pay the salary of the journalist for the time they're working on the project. The Times will pay the salary, and I don't know whether I said who would publish it first. I think, frankly, I think the best thing is to publish it at the same time. The argument for publishing it both places is simply that, you know, while the New York Times has, you know, millions of readers, it has, if you do something with a paper in or a reporter, because we're not just doing it with individual news organizations, in a small community in Mississippi, if you want it to be read by the people in that community, you can't just depend on the New York Times, right? We may have 50 readers in that small community. So you want somebody to be able to publish it in that community, right? That's why I don't think it's first. I think, frankly, I think it would have to be at the same time. Does that answer the question? And I don't think there would be a remuneration to the other news organization other than paying the salary of the journalist.
Okay, all right, I've got, it's probably the last question before we go to our introductions. I wanted to know if John and Carolyn and Dean and Marc could sort of evaluate the mood of their newsrooms in light of what we're hearing about the Guild reports on the evaluations, the differences among the races and evaluations, and now people refusing to go back after working remotely because of COVID. What do you make of that? What's the morale like in your newsrooms?
Marc, do you want to go first since you're there more than I am these days? But I'll also answer a version of it too, and Don should too.
Yeah, the New York Times is in the midst of Guild negotiations right now, and the News Guild has not had a contract in some time. We have, you know, record inflation, and people are really feeling it. People are really in need of a raise, and the negotiations are have been going on for a long time. And Joe and Carolyn and I have expressed very clearly that we think the journalists in the New York Times newsroom ought to get a raise, ought to get a healthy raise. We're not the negotiators, but that is one of the reasons why I would say things, the mood is a bit strange right now at the New York Times. I'll let Carolyn talk about return to office, but let me talk a little bit about the performance ratings. And that has come up that there are some racial disparities in the different allocations of ratings within the guild. And when that came up, Joe, Carolyn, and I, looked at the data, which we had seen for the very first time recently, and basically decided there is a problem. And we formed a group, a 4-person group. I'm one of the 4, to sort of overhaul our performance evaluation system, and we're doing that. I've been at the New York Times so long that when I tell young people how long, they gasp because it's longer than they've been alive. So 22 years. So interns, actually gasp when I say that. So 22 years. And for most of that time, you really did not have a sense of what your editors thought about you, how they thought you were doing. It was very, very opaque. You had to sort of figure it out. When I first became an editor, one of the things that sort of shocked me about being an editor is that you would be in a room with other editors, and editors would say very, very frank and sometimes harsh things about the reporters. That reporter can't write. That reporter is never meets deadline. Produces disorganized copy. Just really.
Uh-oh.
Mark, we lost you. I don't know if you can hear us.
Okay, we're gonna. All right. You want to finish what he's saying, Carolyn?
Yeah, sure. I want to add one. I know that the question had a couple of different dimensions to it. One focus that we and other news organizations are really emphasizing right now is how do you bring back a feeling of togetherness at the New York Times? How do you bring together the spirit of newsrooms, especially with us right now in the middle of these very difficult contract negotiations? So we have moved into a phase where we're expecting people to come back to the newsroom 3 days a week. We have been extremely flexible about it. We're not disciplining people who are not coming back. We are, in some cases, giving people exemptions. And we're really trying to be intentional and thoughtful about what that experience of being in a newsroom is like and what the hierarchy is like for people at every kind of tier of the newsroom, and including people of color, including women, including introverts, including people who weren't comfortable in newsrooms before. So we've been really pleased so far. We're kind of approaching it somewhat differently from our friends at the Washington Post, but I think last week we had close to 70% of the newsroom that's based in New York come in. And so part of what we're trying to do is to bring back what was kind of magical about being together, the creativity and the sharing of ideas, but also the mentoring and development of a new generation of journalists. So, Dean, is there anything that you want to add on that?
No, the only, I think that was well put and honest by both of you. I mean, I think the newsrooms in general, and I bet you Kevin, Don, and others who are on the line who are running newsrooms now, newsrooms in general, I think are unsettled. I think they're unsettled,
for multiple reasons.
Yeah, and I think that part of it is, the mood of the country. The country's unsettled. Part of it is, frankly, the healthy existence of a new generation of journalists who want to challenge some of the ways we do business. I disagree with them about some things, but they're right about others. There's a generational shift that's probably unlike anything we've seen. And you can never, I don't think, in my experience, I don't think you can downplay the impact of COVID. The way, not only people who've, lost people, people who've sort of lost, being in big workplaces, who suddenly have to go back into big workplaces, people who are still anxious, if you live in New York, about getting on the subway. I just don't think you can overstate. I think this is like a historic leadership challenge, not just for journalists, but for everybody who leads an institution. But since the people on this line are all journalists, this is a historic leadership challenge. How do you restore what we lost that was good, while bringing in some of the changes over the last couple of years that can make us better? And that's always tricky.
Very good. All right, Don, and also I left off Kevin for that question, so I'd like Kevin to weigh in as well.
Yeah, we're voluntary right now. Also, I'm in the office daily myself because I'll have folks who'd say they want to come in, Mondays or Fridays or in between. So I want to make sure that I'm there for everyone during the week. But I must admit, it is extremely tough to manage from afar because you just can't develop people. I mean, I've been trying to develop people through Zoom by setting up, management sessions and stuff to talk through things. I'm telling you, it's tough. It's challenging. But you can't allow your staff to see that. You have to come prepared and ready every single day. We'll probably come back on a hybrid schedule. When? I have no idea. The other day, we just simply asked folks to come in. We needed 75 people to come in and just take a random staff photo in our hub. The publisher was walking around asking me, are they going to come? Are they going to come? But they all trickled in right 5 minutes beforehand. And then right afterward, after we finished that photo shoot, they were gone. Everyone took off. So I guess they've gotten comfortable out there. We want our reporters out in the field, no doubt about it. But it's tough to develop right now. And when you're out there recruiting also too, the first question that folks are asking, especially from out of state, is it a remote job?
It just, by the way, they just filmed a movie in the New York Times newsroom, and the newsroom was the movie. She said the newsroom was so empty they had to hire actors.
Oh no!
Newsroom, because otherwise there was nobody there. So
look,
Wow.
and we just moved into a new building here not too long ago. I guess a couple of years ago. All of this stuff is brand new. It's new. It's a big, beautiful building.
Yeah. Look.
Okay. In addition to Kevin, Maria Reeve is also on the call too at the Houston Chronicle. So please weigh in, Maria.
The only thing I'll add to what my colleagues have said is just that to take it to the bigger, larger world. The future of work is a whole area of coverage, right? It's a whole new topic. It's not going to be the same. And all companies are grappling with it. It gets into economics and real estate, how people use their travel and expense money. The notion of flying executives and leaders to cross country to have a meeting, to last an hour. We've learned a lot of things through COVID. Our business, of course, we ought to be among the best because we're chroniclers. And we're very nimble, right? We can file stories from airplane hangars, anywhere, right? And so we know we're resilient in that way. I do think some of the serendipity is missing, right? Of just being together and being able to, that kind of organic quality of walking over and ideas flowing and seeing things, right? Being at the hub of a news desk and actually seeing things. And so we're missing some of that. Don't want to lose that forever. We're currently we're not in any mandatory, we're in a voluntary basis, figuring out still what is going to be our ultimate kind of posture on it. But in the meantime, we're trying to program the newsroom. We're trying to bring people in for reasons, everything, master classes, teach some of the things we did on Zoom, having occasions, social occasions, maybe have food trucks come, Food Truck Wednesday, certain brainstorms, meetings. We have a great new facility that the Soon-Chong family has created. We have a new test kitchen and new patio spaces and an urban park. So we have things that can compel people to be there. The one thing I'll say that's a little bit different than some of the other news organizations is our owner is a scientist. It's a biomedical scientist currently actively working on second generation vaccine. So he has a different kind of window and lens into what all of the ramifications of COVID. And so from an ownership, there's not been a push for us to get back by any, from the top level, but journalists want to get back. Journalists like to see each other. And every time we manage to gather, whether it's off campus or on campus, you can see the sparks, right? People love to be with each other. And so we're in the process of, coming back. I try to, come in 2 or 3 times a week myself. And more and more of our leaders are coming in.
Okay, Maria, are you able to? You're at the soccer match, your son's soccer match.
Yeah. Yes, I unmuted. Can you hear me,
okay.
Richard?
Yes, I can hear you. We can hear you. Please go ahead. Uh-oh.
Okay. Yeah, this has been a great heard all of you. Okay, it's been a true challenge through COVID, managing people, like Don said, through Zoom. But I'm using quote fingers, requiring people to come in 2 days a week. So generally Tuesday, Thursdays, we get a good crowd. The food trucks do bring people in, as Kevin said. But we're also, finding that when folks come in, they like it. They like seeing their colleagues. They like that exchange of ideas. They like to, hey, I read your story, that was great. So there are some real advantages, and they are discovering it themselves. Being in the office makes a difference. So less on us to require that and more of them to discover the advantages. I come in every day because I like being in the office. I like seeing people. And my husband is a journalist who works from home, so I want to be there. Like, we have to separate our work. So it really has been a true challenge. So, but not one that's not insurmountable.
Very good. Okay, thank you, Maria. All right, now we're going to go to our introductions, and the priority will be given to those who have not said anything yet. John Yearwood, we'll start with you. Who are you, John? Please unmute.
Hey, Richard, sorry about that. Yeah, John Yearwood. I am the editorial director for diversity and culture at Politico. And since I have the floor and we're talking fellowships, Politico has a couple fellowships that the deadline is at the end of the month. And J. Yearwood at Politico.com or Politico.com careers for anyone interested in those fellowships. They are year-long fellowships with the promise of a full-time job at the end of the fellowship. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, John. Barbara Reynolds.
Yes, I have 60 years in journalism. I've started with the Columbus Call-and-Post. I was a Washington correspondent for the Chicago Tribune. I was an editorial director of the op-ed page and columnist for USA Today for 13 years, author of 8 books. The latest is Coretta Scott King's memoirs, and a visiting professor at several universities.
Okay, Rebecca Aguilar.
Oh. Hi, everybody. I'm Rebecca Aguilar, president of the Society of Professional Journalists, the founder of Latinas in Journalism, a virtual group. And I want to invite you all to our national convention in Washington, D.C., Media Fest 22 at the end of the month. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca. Charlie Cobb. Unmute, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Charlie Cobb, really retired from the business. I was a foreign affairs reporter for NPR. I did documentaries for Frontline in its earliest days, and for many, many years was a staff writer for National Geographic magazine. I have now, in my retirement years, turned myself to writing books, and I'm hard at work, though behind, on my fourth. My last book was called This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed: How Guns Made the Civil Rights Movement Possible.
So timely. Also co-founder of NABJ.
Yes, a co-founder of the National Association of Black Journalists.
And active with the SNCC alumni, the SNCC veterans, since he was a field secretary.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
I'm not going to read your
Yes.
whole resume, but those are the things.
Yes, in my very earliest years, I was a SNCC field secretary for 5 years in Mississippi.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, Roger Witherspoon, just the brief version, please.
Hi, everybody. I started in '66. When the announcer on the radio was livening up all of the dismal news with nigger jokes in between each item. And I walked down to the station and said, "You don't have any right to do that." And told the station manager, "Besides, he's not that good. You ought to stop him." And the station manager said, "Could you do a better job?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Fine, you start tomorrow." And that's how I got into the news business in '66. And since then, I've done a little bit of everything. Thanks a lot for having this session here.
Thank you, Roger. Monty Young.
Hi, I'm the assistant managing editor on the Long Island desk at Newsday.
Okay, thank you, Monty. That was short and sweet. Sheila Solomon.
Sheila Solomon in Chicago. I wear quite a few hats. The one I'm going to pitch today is that I'm president of the board of directors for City Bureau. And I bring that up specifically because I am just really excited about what I was hearing from Dean and others about the hiring opportunities. One of the many things that City Bureau is becoming known for is our fellowship program. We have some tremendous fellows who have trained with us, gone on to the Washington Post and other newspapers and TV and radio stations for that matter. And so I am going to encourage our leadership team to reach out to you to talk about our fellows.
Thank you, Sheila. Will Sutton. Unmute, please, unmute.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Will Sutton. I'm a columnist and editorial writer at the New Orleans Times-Picayune, The Advocate, NOLA.com. Returned home in 2019 after my career in journalism, doing other things in other places. Happy to be back home. Thankful for this conversation and have appreciated being with everybody.
Very good. Thank you, Will. Hazel Edney. I think you can just be brief then, I guess. We know you.
Yes, I can. I'll try. Hazel Trice Edney, editor-in-chief of the Trice Edney Newswire, president, CEO of Trice Edney Communications, and an adjunct professor at the Howard University Cathy Hughes School of Communications, teaching journalism, entrepreneurship, and multicultural media history.
Very good. Thank you, Hazel. Gloria Minot.
Gloria Minot, formerly of WHUR and WPFW Radio. Thanks for a great session.
Thank you, Gloria. Adam Powell.
Hi, and I began in 1964 interviewing Fannie Lou Hamer live on the floor of the Democratic National Convention for CBS News. That's because Mike Wallace was out of position. But that led to my being at CBS for 16 years and then running NPR News. And then some of you remember the Newsroom.
Oh, yes.
And spent several years at the Freedom Forum, went to USC and ran a national laboratory. And now I'm running a election cybersecurity initiative, training people in all 50 states to keep elections secure. And next week we go to Africa, beginning our international programs in Africa, where they're having 18 elections next year.
Wow, I didn't know that. Okay, thank you, Adam. Fred Sweets.
Fred Sweets, contributing editor at my favorite Black weekly, the St. Louis American, formerly of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, the Washington Post, the LA Times, and AP.
As a photojournalist.
As a photographer and editor. Oops, I left that part out.
Right.
Thanks, Richard. And belated congrats to Carolyn and Marc. And Dean will be good at what he's going to do with us.
All right, Don Bracely has returned from after having given us a wonderful update on Buffalo a few months ago. Don Bracely.
Hi, yeah, I'm one of the editorial writers at the Buffalo News. I've been there 22 years. Prior to that, was in Rochester for 10.5 years with Prince.
That's right. All right, thank you, Dawn. Maria Reeve. We've heard about your experiences there. Neil Heinen.
I'm former retired editorial director at the CBS affiliate in Madison, Wisconsin, and the editorial director at Madison Magazine. A longtime colleague of Richard's with the National Conference of Editorial Writers, for which I also served as president, and am currently working with a group of colleagues here, building the Center for Black Excellence and Culture in Madison, which we hope to be a national model.
Yes, and they've explained that in previous roundtables, so we wish them the best.
Thank you.
John Watson.
Hi, I'm John Watson, a professor of journalism at American University in Washington, D.C. I spent 20 years at a newspaper in northern New Jersey, feeding Newsday and the New York Times with new talent. We currently have a new program here at American
Wait a minute, what's the name of the paper?
Oh, the Jersey Journal, a Newhouse paper. We currently have a program here at American University. We partnered with Harvard and Temple, and it's called the Law and Justice Journalism Program. We have internships with working early career journalists, and we're supposedly training them in the new way to deal with covering crime and the courts. It's a one-year program. We pay a $7,500 stipend, and they arrive at American University in the spring for some in-person training, but they're lined up with mentors already. The first program is already underway with 16 interns, and 9 of the 16 are Black or Hispanic. This is part of our university's devotion to becoming essential in the diversification of newsrooms across the country. So if you have someone who may want to get into the program next year, hit me up.
All right, thanks, John. Lonnie Isabel.
Yes, hi, Richard. I am Lonnie Isabel. I've been a reporter, editor at many newspapers for many years, and also run into many of you in the course of that. And I was a journalism professor. I now live in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, where I write and edit and consult from home. And I'm also advising the Oklahoma Eagle, the oldest Oklahoma Black newspaper, over 100 years old, on its relaunch. And I'm on the board of the Oklahoma Watch, which is the first-class investigative nonprofit here.
Was one of those newspapers Newsday by chance?
I did work at Newsday. Yes, I did. And Don, congratulations. God bless you. What a great place. Good thing you're not across from the Cabbage Patch anymore, but that's cool.
All right, Leon Carter.
What's up, Richard? Leon Carter, editorial director at The Athletic. A great discussion on an important NFL Sunday. I'll get to the games in a minute. Also, I'm the founder of the Sports Journalism Institute. We have trained over 350 people and sent them into the world of journalism, sports journalism, and applications are now open to train the 31st class. I think a moment ago, Adam Powell mentioned the Freedom Forum. They helped us launch the Sports Journalism Institute. And I think there were 1 or 2 people on this call who were actually in SJI several years ago, and they have gone on to great things in the industry. So once again, great conversation. on an important NFL Sunday.
All right, Austin Fenner.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Austin Fenner. I'm a former reporter with the New York Daily News, New York Post. I've been contributing to the Positive Community Magazine, Black-owned publication that's distributed at churches throughout the New York, New Jersey Metro Editor, and also writing for something called the Jewish World Magazine.
Okay. All right, Jim Estrin. Unmute, please, unmute.
Sorry about that. So I'm Jim Estrin. I've been staff at the Times for over 30 years. I'm a photographer. I also write. And I'm involved in several mentoring programs.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And he was with us before in our program with photojournalists. Angela Dodson. Unmute, please.
My button had disappeared off the screen. I am Angela Dodson. I am a veteran of newspapers since 1972, including the New York Times and about 5 others. I am currently CEO of my own company, Editors on Call. We do writing and editorial services. My husband works with me in that, Michael Days, he says he's not retired, he's rewired. I'm the author of a book, Remember the Ladies, Celebrating Those Who Fought for Freedom at the Ballot Box, about women's suffrage. And I wrote the introduction to another book on women's suffrage that was published 100 years ago called Jail for Freedom.
Here, here. Okay, Daryl Burnett.
Hi, I'm Daryl Burnett. I'm a senior editor at the Chronicle of Higher Education, and thanks for a very inspiring discussion.
All right, thank you. Sharon Farmer.
Power to the people, people to the power. These things did so good. I'm still having a great time. So I'm not retired either. I'm rewired and I got more stuff going on. Thank you.
Sharon is our photographer. All right, Elliot Francis.
Thanks, Richard. Oh, that's a tough act to follow. Hi, everybody. Elliot Francis, former news anchor, reporter with WGBH in Boston, CNN, ABC 7 in Washington, D.C. Currently the host and producer of Now with Elliot Francis on Facebook and YouTube. Another great conversation today, I must say. Reminded me of some of the unfortunate episodes during my tenure with Fox News Channel back in the 90s, but also reminded me how far we've come with some of those issues. So thank you. Thank you very much.
You're here. Okay. Jonathan Abrams, first timer.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me and thanks for this wonderful conversation. It's been great seeing so many people who have played such a wonderful role in my own career, looking at somebody like Miss Sheila Solomon, who was at MetPro when I was there, or Mr. Carter. I'm a proud Sports Journalism Institute alum. I was lucky enough to be under Mr. Dean Baquet at the Los Angeles Times at the start of my career. And I am currently, just to keep it short, a sports reporter at the New York Times.
All right, thanks again. Greg Morris.
Hi, I'm Greg Morris. I teach journalism at Hunter College in New York City. And I also do a lot of fellowship work with the cooperative journalism program at Montclair. I wish I had 15 minutes to talk, but 30, I have enough time to say that I've first met Richard Prince when we were both working in the Gannett newspaper in Rochester.
Right.
I want to just add this real quick. One of the things about that newsroom that I'll never forget is one of the most hostile places for Italian Americans I've ever been in. And then wrapping up, I'm working on 2 memoirs. One is the assistant basketball coach at Cornell when the black ball players walked out. And I'm working on an expose about teaching at Hunter College. And I want to say anything to get me into trouble. And I also want to add, this has been one of the greatest conversations I've been able to participate in and listen about what's really going on regarding diversity, which for me is reality in the newsrooms. And I hope to I've got significant stuff that I believe I can pass on to my students and make things easier for them. And thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Greg. Darlene Superville.
Hello, thanks Dean, Carolyn, Mark, and Don for joining us today. I'm Darlene Superville. I'm a White House reporter for the Associated Press. And I'm also co-author of Jill, a biography of First Lady Jill Biden.
Thank you, Darlene, and congratulations on the book publication. Bill Geisler.
Hi, everybody. I'm the Bill Plant Chair in Leadership and Media Integrity at Loyola University, Chicago. Thank you, Richard, for reprising the civil rights coverage of Bill Plant, who we lost since the last time we were all together, but your column paid tribute to the work he did in the 1960s in the South. I'm also the Freedom Forum Fellow in Women's Leadership, and as such, I guide the Power Shift Project, which is about newsrooms that should be equitable. And as I teach leadership, what I have found is that people really have an interest in inclusive leadership. I'll be teaching a webinar in that tomorrow and also reprising that one at the IRE's DBEI Symposium. I'll put the link in for it. I did earlier, but if you want to spread the word, turnout has been great, which is the most encouraging thing that I have seen. I think people want to learn.
Here, here. Okay, thank you, Jill. Miranda Spivak.
Hi, I'm Miranda Spivak. I'm a former Metro reporter and editor at the Washington Post with a deep interest in local news. Lately, actually, I freelance for the New York Times, and a shout out to Greg Schmidt on your staff, who's a great editor in the business desk. But I wanted to pitch an idea out to Dean. I don't know if he's still on the call, but that is this. I've done some editing for the Fund for Investigative Journalism, which funds a lot of local investigative stuff, and you may have already talked to them. I've been editing their newsletter, and what I've found is that across the country, where some of these smaller independent news organizations are working, they're working on the same stories locally, it's Medicaid transportation or whatever, and that there's really an opportunity, I think, to mine that to create some national stories on these local issues. I can send you a note about this, but it was really fascinating to me in the editing that I've done to kind of discover this and connect these people who hadn't connected. So I just throw that out there.
I agree. Please do send me a note. I think somebody put my email in.
Yeah, I will.
I'm finding the same phenomenon.
Yeah, it's really it's terrific actually, but they're all sort of spread apart. Yeah. So yeah, okay.
Anyway. Miranda.
Yeah.
Lisa Wilson.
Hey, everybody. I'm Lisa Wilson. I'm an editorial director at The Athletic, where I get to work with my wonderful colleague, Leon Carter. Also great to see some of my former colleagues on here. I was at the Buffalo News for 18.5 years. The last 7 as executive sports editor, where I worked with Don Bracely. And for 1.5 years, I was a sports editor. It was then The Undefeated, where I got to work with the wonderful Kevin Merida and Karen Berry. And I'm also a past president of the Associated Press Sports Editors. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for the invite, Richard.
All right, thanks. And thanks for making time, even though some games are on. Mary C. Curtis.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great conversation and so great to see so many familiar faces. I'm Mary C. Curtis, based in Charlotte, North Carolina and Washington, D.C. I'm a columnist at Roll Call, cover the intersection of politics, culture, and race, and host of its Equal Time podcast, guest host of Slate's What Next podcast, senior leader with the Op-Ed Project, and a former Times person. So that's it.
Oh, there you go. Yannick Rice-Lamb.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yannick Rice-Lamb. I'm a professor of journalism at Howard University. I also worked at the New York Times for a decade, and I was editor-in-chief of BT Weekend Magazine and Heart and Soul Magazine. I'm completing a doctorate in medical sociology at Howard. I write about health and environmental issues. And also, if anyone would like to help our students on Election Day, I'm going to put my email in the chat. We could use your help at any point, virtually or in person, from 7 a.m. till after midnight or whenever all the votes are in. Thank you.
Very good. Rania Joshi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Pradnya Joshi, or PJ, as most people know me.
PJ.
I'm a alumni of both Newsday and New York Times, and it's so great to see everybody
Oh
here.
my goodness.
Yes, now I'm at the Washington Post as a weekend editor on the national desk. So.
Very good. Okay, thanks for joining us. Gwen Gilliam. Gwen, can you unmute?
Okay. Hi. Did you call me? Okay.
Yes,
My
sorry.
name is I can't hear you, so I'll talk because I'm in a public place.
Oh, okay.
So I don't want you to hear all of that. Can you? I don't know if that makes sense. Let me just.
Yes.
Okay. Let me hear you.
Yes. Now we can't hear you.
All right. Well, I'm just going to introduce myself. I'm Gwen Gilliam, and I live in Baltimore. Just outside of Baltimore, and I grew up in that area that you've watched on the HBO, The Wire. And so my plan was to write an alternative story to Baltimore, West Baltimore, because there was a lot of greatness that came out of there. And in the process, while I was working on it, Freddie Gray was murdered. And so my work changed. The focus of my work changed to Freddie Gray. And so I've been writing about the cover up of his murder. And that's what I am finishing now. And I would love to speak with Dean at the end of this call, because I do have a lot of information, really too much information for one person, because it just, there's so much going on in Baltimore right now. So.
Do send me an email. I think it's dbaquet@nytimes.com.
All right, Damon Sales.
Will do. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Prince. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Damon Sales. I am the senior editor of culture for The Athletic. I get the pleasure of working alongside Lisa Wilson and Leon Carter. I really appreciate the invitation. Thoroughly enjoyed the roundtable discussion.
Excellent. Okay. Donna Owens.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My apologies that I am not on video. My screen froze early in the process. But anyway, hi. I'm Donna Marie Owens. I'm a national freelance journalist. My bylines include the Washington Post, NBC News, Essence. I covered the Freddie Gray case extensively for Reuters, and I have a piece today on the NBC News web site about Black women in the vote. I am also, Mr. Baquet, Carolyn, and Marc, on the New York Times roster as a contributing freelancer here from Baltimore. I've contributed to, I think, 2 or 3 pieces about COVID, and I'm hoping to do more with your newsroom. Thank you all for this amazing conversation. Thank you, Richard.
All right. Thank you, Donna. Did I leave anybody out? No? Good. No? All right. Well, we're going to wrap up, but I want to find out whether.
Yes, you did.
Who do I leave out?
You let me out. Karen Berry, copy
Karen,
chief.
you know who you are.
Anscape. No, I got two things I want to promote. Number one, Anscape Books just published its 2nd book in the beginning of October. Black Toad, 33 dynamic essays. It's sold on Amazon. I put the link in the chat, and it includes the article I wrote about the lynching of my ancestor. Also, I wanted to say hi to Dean because, and we were actually introduced by John Carroll, who was my former boss at The Sun, at NABJ. I was in the line, they were in the line, and we lost John about a year, not even a year later.
Yeah, that's right.
And also a shout out to Marc, and we know that story, so he and I know that story, so it takes too long. But just a shout out to him again. And of course, I think I know about 3/4 of the people here in the room, so hi to all y'all. And Richard, don't forget me again.
Okay. All right. I did leave out Benita Bing. who is our Zoom master.
Yes.
So Benita, take it away.
Zoom master. I don't think so. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Benita Bing. I am the president of the Exposure Group, African American Photographers Association, located here in Washington, D.C., and also the producer of the Zoom meeting, as well as the owner of the Talbert and Bing studios located in the Brooklyn area of Northeast D.C.
Thank you, Benita. Okay, now did I get everybody? Okay, all right, before we sign off, I just want to find out whether any of our speakers, Dean, Carolyn, Marc, Don, has any last words they want to leave with us.
I would just say thank you. It was a terrific conversation. Richard, I'm sorry it took us so long to do it, but I promise you I'm available next time and hopefully one day in person. But thank you all. It was just a terrific conversation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Same here. Thanks for everything. I appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for being here, and thanks to the people on Facebook. The people who are on the Zoom will be receiving a printout of the chat, and soon everybody will be getting a notice about our November roundtable, and I hope to see some of you then. So thanks again, and thanks to the people on Facebook as well. Glad you joined us. Okay.
Bye.
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 Bye, everyone. Thank you again, Richard.
Okay.